start the afternoon session here. So good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully by now you've gotten used to sounding on my voice. But I'm going to formally introduce myself. I'm Brian, CLCC's Community House Creation Coordinator. I sat in universities last year as a participant, so I'm very honored to be in this position to help take this step. Before lunch, we heard a great discussion from different perspectives at the state level, cross sectors, about how to approach land use more holistically here in Connecticut. CLCC has the unique identity of being a statewide organization that works at very regional and local levels, representing over 120 land trusts, each with their own history and focus, yet connected by the common goal of conservation. We try to utilize our unique position as best as possible to connect the bird's eye view back down to ground truth. So at this point in our program, you will now hear from a range of perspectives across sectors from regional and local representatives, each with their own history and focus, discuss how they connect through land pertinent topics from the morning. It's my honor to introduce the Grassroots panelists, Caleb Garrett, Connie Thames, Mariana Martinez, Kira Glenn-Gessett, Francis Pickering, and Jonathan Savage, and our discussion moderator, Chief Stewart. After you have worked closely with CLCC for the last several years as owner of her consulting firm, Stewart Environmental and Equity Consulting, has extensive experience navigating groups through these kinds of discussions. She's helped me personally in a few months to assess how I'm approaching these topics, land trusts, and the diversity of communities that the state you're able to serve through our community conservation program. I can't think of a better person to facilitate this conversation, so would you, Ashley, please?
Thank you. Thank you and welcome to our Grassroots panel. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all here. Thanks for sticking with the afternoon, right, the post-lunch discussion. So I want to welcome you all. During this session, you will hear from my amazing panel that I'll introduce shortly. But first, I wanted to just give you some information about me. My name is Ashley Stewart. Like Javon said, I own consulting division of Stewart Environmental Consulting. And today, I will serve as your moderator for this panel. My career has focused on project and program development that lead from the community's perspective. So I've done this in my engineering work, I've done this in my planning work, and throughout my career, leading from the community's perspective to inform, initiate, and create new programs and projects. So this work has kept me knit in communities across Connecticut. One of the main ways that I want to start this conversation with is a bit of a framing. It will be easy to think of grassroots as the bottom. But today I challenge you all as listeners to think of this panel and the grassroots perspective as the essential core. And that framing is important, mostly because I think we think of grassroots as simple, maybe even small scale, but instead to think of it as so essential that we need to be tied into what the grassroots perspective is. And figuring out what that need is kind of why we're together. So the core or the root of all action and programming, if it is to do any environmental good, should stem from our grassroots. So with that framing, let me introduce my panel. And also give you some information about how this has to go. So for the bulk of our time together in this session, we'll be having a conversation among us about their work. The latter part of this session will open up audience questions, kind of similar to this morning's session. So throughout the conversation, be thinking about what kind of questions or what you hope to hear or whatever. So you'll see Jovan and Ricky with cue cards circulating to collect them, but then Amy circulating to collect them, but also collect a few in advance if you want to, just to be ready for jotting down questions. We'll set aside time just for questions. So I don't know if y'all know, but whenever you first start something, you gotta kind of get the jitters out. That was it. So now that the jitters are out, we're gonna go through introductions of our panel. And each one, please tell us your name, your organization, and some of what your organization is doing. Feel free to take it, talk to them now. You wanna start, Jonathan?
I'll start off. I am Jonathan Savage. I'm currently the acting executive director for Gather New Haven, community organization in New Haven. Our mission and what we look to do, kind of can be summed up in this statement of nature and neighbors thriving together. And we're like striving for the commitment towards equity, justice, and health for our community, ourselves, and the environment practice. In doing that work, we approach it from many different ways through multiple programs. I'll list through them rather quickly, but we manage nature preserves within the city, urban nature preserves, 3 of which are traversable and open to the public. And they range in scale from forest land, wetland, and then also on the ocean, on the Longboard, in the Longboard area, we manage 44 community gardens within the city, serving over 500 families. We manage a farm program, which has 3 sites, which sole or main priority is supporting our farm-based wellness program, which is a diabetes prevention program, and also works with other diet-related illnesses. We have our Growing Entrepreneur program, which is a program geared for high school students coming into the space, the environmental space, putting together entrepreneurial ideas and being supported by the organizations. Kind of flesh those ideas out to break them to the next stage. This past year, we just started our Eco Lab, which is kind of around the same realm as the GE program, but working with 18 to 30-year-olds, giving them access to a local makerspace inside in the city. So access to things like 3D printing and kind of all of the workshop tools that you need to do wood building, things like that. So really creating access for the ideas that come out of these young people and young adults, and trying to help them bring that to fruition. We manage our Schooner program, which is the environmental science and sailing program that we both start in the summer. This year we introduced an environmental education segment to our organization, which is kind of working for all our programs, and also in collaboration with some of the local schools to bring environmental education, hosted among our spaces, whether it be the community gardens, the farms, or the preserves. I mentioned briefly, but our farm-based wellness program is distinctly a farms, but definitely works really hand in hand. So we kind of touch all these spaces, was kind of seem a little bit all on the outskirts, but they're all looking to solve the issue of health, equity, environmental justice to link city here.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name
Can you
is
pull the mic?
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Garrett. I am a native of Hartford, Connecticut, and I, over the past 5 years, have started 2 committee groups. One being called Human Dream Catcher, and another being called the Circle. And our focus in these committees is to raise consciousness and awareness of Indigenous people who still live in our communities, who are one of the main people to be known as the stewards of the land, and also being able to teach the meaning of what harvest means as we utilize the land for creating crops and growing plantations across our state, mainly in the Valley area. The group that I've created over the past 5 years kind of starts from a vision that I had since 2007, which was to bring the natives back home. Hartford was once known as Suka'ak, and that is the meaning of Black fertile soil. And the indigenous people who lived here knew the floodplains had an effect on how the crops grow. And they taught a lot of the English and Dutch who came up the Connecticut River how to use the land to grow. And part of the transition over generations, we've lost contact to the indigenous tribes that once taught our people how to walk the land. And my goal and mission is to rekindle that interest. Mostly finding a sacred space that they can call home, a place where they can actually teach a lot of the traditions, customs, and beliefs of their own lineage history, but also to pass it on to the next generation. The group has successfully celebrated 5 harvest festivals in the Keeney Park area, which is connected with the Amity Forest Home and Experience Center, to have an opportunity to showcase what harvest means and how Native grew the 3 sisters, the bean, corns, and squash along the Connecticut rivers to actually flourish many tribes throughout the state of Connecticut. So my hopes is to be able to network with more people from different organizations to see what kind of partnerships we can foster together to build a human dream catcher, to connect culture, tradition, customs, and beliefs to our present and our future. I think we owe it to our ancestors to pass along a lot of this lineage and traditions to the future generation. And that's part of why I have been on this mission since 2007, working at the National Connecticut Pequot Reservation, but living in Hartford and realizing there was a disconnection between 2 very popular communities. But now that I'm back in Hartford, it was time to put together committees, partnerships, groups, festivals to be able to share something that's almost eroded from our virtual lives.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. Maybe I can stay back for a little bit. Sure. I'm Connie Manis. I live in Kent. And actually, well, let me back up first, because I wanted to say, first of all, what an honor it is to be serving on a panel with these esteemed colleagues, to be here with you all in the CLCC, and how grateful I am to CLCC for putting us together. Back to Kent, I just to kind of locate you. I work out of an office that is looking out over the Housatonic River and across the river to look at the ridgeline of the Appalachian Trail. My training is in law, and I also have a master's in public administration and a specialty in working with nonprofits, really primarily land trusts in the area of standards and practices, accreditation, capacity building, and all of that. Like so many of you, I wear a lot of hats, and I think there are 3 of them that would be of relevance to today's presentation. First of all, I direct and coordinate the Litchfield Hills Greenprint Collaborative, which is sponsored by the Housatonic Valley Association. It is a regional conservation partnership, an RCP, as we call them, kind of a network of 33 conservation organizations working across Northwest Connecticut, including single town land trusts, regional land trusts, and some statewide organizations. We have 2 main goals. Number 1 of which is to do more conservation together and more coordinated conservation than we would be doing on our own. And the second goal is to support one another so that we can make sure that we are the most successful and sustainable that we can be. We've been going at this for 16 years. So I would say that it's working pretty well. If you lean in or go farther down to the grassroots, I also serve as the executive director of one of those Greenprint partners, the Kent Land Trust. And so like other single town land trusts, we have a mix, we protect a mix of conservation easements and fee properties. We sponsor trails and maintain trails for our community and visitors. We conduct events. We lease a farm where fresh-grown produce is sold to the community. All of our part-time staff and our board live in the Kent community. And then if you zoom out so I'm kind of like the whole blade of grass here. I'm also a member of the RCP Network Steering Committee, and the RCP network is kind of like a network of networks, if you will. Many of you will be familiar with the visionary Phil Levitt. My colleague Katie Blake is also here in the room today, and the RCP network tries to be a connector and a convener and does a really terrific job of bringing in people across sectors who are in networks all over the place. Just a little bit about what we do, going back to the green print. As a network, we are a facilitator, an aggregator, a convener, and a connector. We bring the local voices to the table, so we're kind of connecting those grassroots to the grass tops. It is a leverager, so bringing strength in numbers, speaking for 33 organizations as opposed to just one. It's a leverager also in terms of the ability to bring together creative funding sources and programs. And so you heard this morning, Commissioner Dykes talking about the leveraging of state and federal funds and private funds as well. Through the green print, we're even able to overcome some of those difficulties with like the long waits in the process by being able to bridge funding. The green print is also an R&D kind of thing. So some of the things that I think RCPs are uniquely suited for is some risk taking and some pilot projecting. So we do a lot of that, kind of imagining what else could be done and trying it out across a number of different organizations in order to be able to evaluate and reflect. The last thing I want to say about the green print is that although it contains a number of different partners, it's really very focused on the regionality and the place-based nature of Northwest Connecticut. So again, Commissioner Dykes this morning talked about the density of Connecticut as a state. Well, I would really phrase it as the diversity of land types across Connecticut. We're not too dense actually in Northwest Connecticut, unless you're talking about trees. And so being able to recognize that different areas of the state serve really different functions, ecosystem functions, is something that having a network like the green print is able to do, is to really bring attention and resources to a specific area of the state. I'm going to stop there and pass to my colleague, Francis.
Thank you. My name is Francis Pickering. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Connecticut Council of Governments. For those of you who don't know, Connecticut doesn't have county government, but we have 9 regional councils of governments. And the way I put it is we are county government light. So I'm essentially equivalent to the county administrator in other states. We are the connective tissue that unites your local municipalities with the state and the federal government. Our board comprises 18 mayors and first selecting Greenwich to Westport and to New Milford and Newtown. We work in a variety of areas, essentially an extension of town hall, undertaking comprehensive transportation planning for the region, which has large environmental impacts, but also environmental planning, emergency preparedness and response, and data and analytics. Some of the projects and programs that may be of interest to the group today include that we have undertaken comprehensive studies of solar access in the region, riparian corridors, wetlands protections, zoning, flooding and repair, comprehensive plans on how to address climate change. We're currently working with EPA on one right now in southwestern Connecticut. We operate programs to provide tax credits to corporations that seek to donate money for open space. We have conducted a comprehensive inventory of all open space in the region. Essentially what we do is we work with all of your mayors and first selectmen, at least in Western Connecticut for me, and with all the commissions and committees in your towns to help realize a better quality of life in your region. I don't want to spend too long with my introduction. I'm happy to answer questions, so I'll pass it on to my peer to the right.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I wonder if you're actually more of a grass top or a grass medium.
No, I would say we are fungus.
We are the beautiful ones that connects all of the plants
Yeah, I
in
think
the
that,
ecosystem.
that's a great question, but something that we'll talk about. Okay. So my name is Myrna Martinez, and I'm the Executive Director of Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust. I find that oftentimes, even in a group like this, because it's mostly land trust, the question is, what is a community land trust? So community land trust holds land in trust primarily for the purpose of creating affordable home ownership. And the ownership is in perpetuity, meaning that there's a resale formula so that that purchased land is always stewarding of affordable home ownership. We also, in Southeastern Connecticut, our mission is also for preservation of green space, primarily more in urban type of a setting, food production and community space. So I think one of the questions was, what are you currently working on? Just to give a little bit of a breath. Yes, it's primarily affordable home ownership. But in August, we did close on a 4-bedroom house in New London that we're currently renovating. In September, we closed on a farm that you'll hear more about. And today we were supposed to, but it'll be postponed until next week, closing on a commercial property that is in partnership with another nonprofit for a community space project. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, let me know if it is possible that you can't hear me, although that would be almost inconceivable. My name is Tira Penn. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Thompson. As my new friend Connie mentioned, she had no idea where that was. It is the actual northeast corner of the state. If you had 3 legs, you could stand in one part of our town in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Before I talk too much about myself and what I'm doing, I also want to acknowledge that I have 2 of my colleagues in land use from Thompson here with us today. Dan Malo, who is our conservation agent and wetlands enforcement officer, and Cindy Dunn, our zoning enforcement officer. Also John Lanky, who's one of our volunteer planning and zoning commissioners. So representation from Thompson, small town with some really dedicated folks there. I've been in the position about 5 years. I would say this crowd probably mostly knows what the planner, the director of planning and development does, so I won't belabor that too much. What I will say is that I come to the job, been in there about 5 years, and I come to it with no background in the field. I mention this for 2 reasons that I think end up being kind of important as I work in the town. One is that I think there is a level of belief, certainly in sort of the everyday population of the town who doesn't interact with this stuff daily, that there is something special or hidden about the knowledge that goes into land use and planning. There is no such thing, right? I am a college dropout, notionally a professional musician and a former radio. This information is accessible to everyone if you take the time to explain it clearly. The other reason I bring that up is because, again, I think credentials can lock us into patterns, and because I was never inside a box, I don't have to worry about thinking outside a box. I never had a box. To move on to some of the things that I've done in that 5 years in April, in that time, I have been the primary author of a total rewrite of the zoning regulations, the plan of conservation and development, and the subdivision regulations. Worked with my friend John Wiskowski on an affordable housing plan, and written 2 ordinances, one for the administration of Public Act 490, which was about an 80% success, that was passed, and a novel ordinance to address blight without writing a blight ordinance. And we can talk about why that was important, called the Ordinance for the Control of Vacant, Abandoned, and Delinquent Properties in Certain Districts. So again, I just bring these things up to say that all of this information is accessible to anyone who puts in the time and has the interest. And that's my shtick.
Thank you. So as you all noticed, this is a really broad panel. We're gonna do our best to cover the scope of what this panel can discuss. But to Fiona's point, are we all grassroots? I think the conversation about earlier this morning about funding and who has access to certain funds, you all are the root of initiating access in representation of people groups. So although we're representing and municipalities, nonprofits, community groups, all in this one panel, you all are representing the collective voice of a bunch of people. And that, I think, is why you're all here for Grassroots. So that being said, no one's talked to me yet about the first panel. I want to spend some time talking about you all's thoughts, what came out of the first panel, what in the discussion was relevant for you all, were there any ahas, or even just things to continue to think about from the first panel. I'm curious about you all's thoughts. Was it new information? Was it old news? And all of that.
Yeah, I'll take this one first, just because something right off the bat in the introductions did occur to me when Commissioner Dykes was talking about what appeared to be a dichotomy between density and conservation. I would go so far, and I actually think this is how I landed on this panel, was running my mouth on this topic at the spring conference last year, that density and conservation are not contradictory. They are in fact essential to one another. Both of those things working together fight what I think we all really don't want, which is sprawl. There is a narrative that gets created that you can't have density and conservation. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I could soapbox about that for a while, but I just wanted to toss that puppy up here.
Okay. Any other thoughts from this morning? Our state agencies either serving y'all or we want to tease into the knot.
I think a couple of things for me. One, yes, I was writing, just vigorously, like trying to print this, print that, making sure that I had that. So that was really great and helpful. I think something else was, there was a question about someone not wanting their land developed, not really being open to that. And I think for me, especially with a panel such as the one that we had and this type of an audience with this topic, I think it's important to go into, well, what does that mean and what are the concerns? Because I think there's a possibility from there to say, well, how do we do it? We are all people that inhabit our space. And so how do we make that happen? How do we place living containers, let's say, and not do it in an intrusive way so that there isn't, so that we're working with one another, meaning like I loved, who went first? Jonathan, did you go first? I liked the language about commitment to ourselves and our environment. There's a lot of language across the board for all of us of how to make this happen together. And I don't think we ask the question enough and depend on one another enough for the solutions. I think it's either who's going to win this? Are you going to get it? Are the conservationists or are the developers going to win?
Yeah, I felt that in the discussion of the competitive nature of the process, right?
Yeah.
So who gets access to these funds, and there can be so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's really important to jump on this idea of like the commonality and the alignment. And one of the things that I was struck by this morning by the case scenarios, especially the first one, is that that is like so many different projects in Northwest Connecticut right now. It is. It was a very good case scenario because it's so common and resonated so well. with me, and I know others in the room. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, you know, any farmer will tell you that farm worker housing is part and parcel of the ability to actually make a go of it. And so the idea that you have a farm that didn't have any housing on it is just, you know, that's a strike against you from the start. But what was striking to me is that, you know, although there were these good examples of where there was teamwork and where there was the ability to make our different programs work together, it seemed like that was really the exception. And because of the commonality of this case scenario, it should be the rule. You know, we should not be like, yay, we got one project done, when, you know, it really describes all of our projects. So getting back to this idea of alignment, one of the things that is new at the Green Print that I'm totally excited about is that, inspired by this symposium last year, we applied for a grant and were funded to launch a project with the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity, which is kind of like the Green Print for housing organizations, I would say. And my colleague Lindsay Larson is here up in the wings. And that project is meant to mimic some of what they achieved in the Hudson Valley of New York, where conservation organizations and housing organizations are coming together to share, develop the relationships, you know, develop kind of a network together, and to be able to present to their public, to their communities, an aligned vision or a policy statement that says those two things, development and conservation, go hand in hand, and it's how we treat them and how we engage in them together that's really going to, you know, that's going to give us success in that endeavor.
Yeah, I noted two things during this morning panel. One of them with the scenarios and discussion was fantastic, and all the panels there, about the programs and funding opportunities they have. But for many members of the public, including citizen activists, it can be quite daunting. There's a real learning curve associated with learning how to navigate local, state, and federal law and bureaucracy. There's a lot of complexity that's built over the years. And I honestly think a lot of people would say, well, we have a project before us, we have to find funding. They might never think, they wouldn't know where to look. And once they know where to look, they wouldn't know how to jump through all the hoops. So that's a critical challenge, because if you don't have that ability, you're going to be left behind. And I think we've seen that across the country in less advanced communities. The communities that tend to know how to navigate the system tend to reap the benefits more of that system. And that's very concerning. The other aspect is, it's quite related, is that if you have an elderly farmer whose heirs don't want to continue the farm, or you have a brownfield out there and you want to develop it now because there are severe housing shortages, you're already too late. You need to plan ahead. So, as I said before, we work in planning. We deliver transportation projects, many other types of projects. The lead time on a new highway or rail station isn't months, it isn't years, it can be decades. And people often get demoralized by planning because they see plans being conducted and set to a shelf and forgotten. But the reality is, if we don't do the planning, it's unlikely you're going to get a project. If you jump out of the woodwork and say, we have to save this farm, it's going to be a Herculean task actually to get everything you need, your capital staff, all the approvals, the property owners, all the heirs on board. So when I do planning, for instance, I'm running a program right now in southwestern Connecticut to look at as we all know, Fairfield County is famously congested. Worst congestion in the country according to recent federal data. We are looking at the entire county, and perhaps what the RCPs are doing, the entire watershed, and saying, let's identify the hotspots. Let's do a comprehensive analysis to determine which hotspots lend themselves to solutions, short, medium, long term, and let's develop conceptual designs and have a pipeline of designs that when we see something coming down the pike saying there's funding, things the stars are aligning, we can pluck it off the shelf and deliver. So every year we are banging out a new project, and we're doing this in transportation, we're doing it in environment, we're doing it in emergency preparedness. That's what you really need to have. This is a huge challenge. I have an insider, I'm paid to do this job. If you are volunteers, to be committed for years for a long-term outcome is really hard. Once you have momentum, it's up and running, and you see things coming off the factory belt year in, year out, it's easier. But if you don't have that, if you're starting up, the lead time is huge. You need to have some type of commitment and faith.
So to your earlier point, one of the things that I wondered from the first panel was, and I'd love to hear you all's thoughts about, is are the state agencies responsive enough or adaptive enough to community and local needs? I heard a lot of established programs, though they didn't hear was that they were asking the students to engage local relevant support programs. Like, are they reachable for everybody or not? And Laura.
That touches on one of my questions. What I was going to say from your first question, one of the points from the first part. I did like the panel. They seem to all want to kind of work together, and we can reach across multiple agencies to look for funding to get the work done. I don't know if that message makes it all the way down to the grassroots, right? And not just speaking from gathering engagement perspective, but speaking from the local kind of farmers, especially some of the BIPOC farmers who sound familiar. I think there's a tendency for people to think that if I want to do something on this space, I can go for a deep grant, right? But they're not thinking I can combine a deep grant with another grant or funding sources from different places. So that language exists and even the want to make that happen exists. I don't know if it's something that's common knowledge that kind of goes all the way down the line. Just to step back to your point that you said before about conservation and kind of development, and kind of for me coming from an urban environment, premise with conservation is important across the world everywhere, but particularly within the urban environments, right? Because the more rural you get, the activities that happen around those kind of conserved spaces and those preserves, they're available, right? When I go to Northeast Connecticut, if I go up to Northwest Connecticut, right? I can go hike the Appalachian Trail. If you're in New Haven or if you're in Bridgeport, there are very limited spaces for you to be able to go into nature, be under green canopy, or learn about invasive species, right? And not only is that kind of taken away from what the youth are able to kind of learn at a young age, which I think I was blessed to kind of be introduced to at a young age, because I spent time in Georgia, I spent time in North Carolina, as well as Connecticut, so it looked different to me, but you don't see that as much in New Haven. And in our urban environments, especially in Connecticut, where there's a big distinct difference between what happens and the nature around our northern, east and west portions, and then kind of that middle and southern section when you go from Hartford to New Haven and across our waterways, our ocean line.
Great points. I heard a couple phrases in the earlier session that I'd love to hear y'all. If any of the sparks anything for you is, they talk about building a team, and this is kind of where you're getting at, like, does the grassroots, do community organizations know that their access to these types of stackable funds? But like, how, I guess I don't even know what the question is, but I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on, like, do you find that there is access to building that team, partnering with either the agencies or across community group? How do things there? Or at least presenting themselves?
Well, when you mention that, it makes me think about some of the challenges my community faces and some of the things that our group has to kind of, one is the fact that there is this big population in Connecticut. And for the committee, out of 10 people, there's only one that's actually, there's only one that's actually from a state recognized tribal group. Everyone else is people who come from the urban environment who's been separated from this circle for many generations. And we're not included in the loop for the grants and for the land, for opportunities to celebrate and be as festive as we would like to be. So a lot of our funding has come from partnerships, relationships with people who actually see the authenticity in our group and our mission of what we're trying to do. And one thing we've not the most is finding grants or funding in land. Partnering with people who actually have more than what we do, to be able to partner us and to be able to show them what we can actually do with the surrounding around us. For instance, this past year, we hosted our fourth annual Harvest Festival, and we wanted to get grants from many different organizations, one being Connecticut Historical Society. And I guess they changed the grant funding, I guess the policies of how they grant certain groups, particularly Indian groups, or festivities, and because we're not federal and state recognized, we're not eligible to apply. So unfortunately, we had to go to alternative routes of finding ways to partnership with other organizations or other people who actually support our mission. Successfully, we did get granted $2,000 from an organization to support the Harvest Festival. But those types of situations that occur puts a lot of these grassroots networks in a standstill, where it's either discouraged or it's pretty much put in a position to where you don't like to do anything about it. Because right now, with the federal and state organized tribes being the ideal Indian for the state of Connecticut, our groups pretty much don't have any rights to say we would like to apply for a grant, or we would like to get access to the land or to the river, perhaps, to do some things that we want to do.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give a little answer to first to the previous question that you asked. And it's not an overarching answer, but I think one thing that struck me about the community, something like a community garden grant, if I heard it correctly, it's only available to municipalities. You're right, that right there seems like a little oxymoron, because most community gardens, I believe, are more community formed from nonprofit organizations or groups that get together within a neighborhood. So to make that only accessible to municipalities, no, does not make them accessible to us. And the other part, it's not fully a statement, it's maybe somewhat of a question for me, about the team building ability. I think it's great to work with one another, and I've found great ability to increase like what you're doing, working with other nonprofits. And I wonder if this is true, that in our urban environments, such as New London, that oftentimes because of the low resource, there's somewhat more of a competitiveness within the community, within the municipality, because the resources are, we don't even have enough for our school system and, you know, public works and so on. And so I don't know that that is always across all sectors. Like I said, within our nonprofit to nonprofit, I think it's more about like, okay, come on, we got this together, you know, but I don't know if across the board, how much, how many obstacles there are because of that competitive and low resource communities. Great ones.
Gatekeeping is real, and when you're looking at all of these options out there, in addition to planning, having, you know, mentioned continuity, you have to be very careful. First of all, just because you can't get the money or access doesn't mean you can't find somebody else who can. So we worked with a local trails group, and they weren't eligible, and we have now got $5 million to build a 55-mile long trail that will be nationally significant. There are some challenges working public sector, nonprofit, but you can find somebody else to stand in for you. The other thing is, when people look at grant opportunities, often excitement or disappointment. Like, I have this great idea, and I have to break the news and say, that's not really what they're after. You know, listen to the bureaucrats who tell you it's probably not going to fly. Other times people say, I'm not eligible, or they just feel deflated. And sometimes that's premature. So just look very carefully, try reading the lines and get the inside scoop on what is actually going on. Sometimes when you build those relationships, you'll actually have the grantor, not that it's happened to me, call you and tell you what to apply for.
Any other? Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of it from being in the position almost of privilege, as you say, in the municipality. And I've written a ton of grants in the last 5 years with reasonable success. I would say if I were putting that other shoe on, in other words, being on the actual grassroots or actual nonprofit sector and wanting to break into that, that would be the best advice I could give to somebody, would be to form the relationships with the municipality. But we are very under-resourced in different ways, kind of municipality up in, we're like flyover, right? It's as if there's no humans there in a lot of ways, historically, and that's less the case. As I have written more and more grants, as those grants include more and more partners, they have been increasingly successful. And I would say to a grassroots organization that if you start with the small ones and build your narrative based off your small success and then go to the next one, it'll actually be easier to find the partners. You know, and look, every municipality is not equal, right? Not all municipal staffs are going to be equally receptive in every community. But my experience of the towns where I have met my peers and counterparts is that they would love to have more input from the people who live in the town and want to work on projects, because usually the input that we get is just people who don't want to do anything, right? So if that other thing happens, also granting agencies love to see narratives from, testimonials from, participation from people in the communities they're meant to serve. If you can include that evidence, whether you're the municipal applicant or the nonprofit applicant, your story is stronger. So I would say, even if it seems daunting, just keep trying to break into those relationships, because they will serve you. They will never hurt you.
Although if I may add, sometimes you're just going to be knocking against the stone walls. And so sometimes you just have to bide your time, say it's not going to work here. I've worked for over 30 municipalities in Connecticut. And the nice thing about that is, and this applies more to regional land trusts, is that maybe there's a path of least resistance through another municipality. Get it done there. Make the people who weren't interested initially jealous. And it's a huge motivator. Oh, why are our neighbors getting that and we aren't? So that might not work for some local land trust, but regional, it's a strong approach.
Yeah, just to add to the ability for partnerships to work in the best interests of nonprofits. Gather New Haven itself is the culmination of a long time partnership between New Haven Farms and New Haven Land Trust, right? So 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there was a gap, but this work in some way is still being done. And through those partnerships and sharing funding and sharing the workload, sharing people capacity, now, it's 4 years now, going on 5 years, now you have this organization, Gather New Haven, that has brought those partnerships into the true one organization, and now giving even more access within the organization, and creating a conduit for us to create more partnerships with more smaller grassroots organizations, and kind of continuing that access. So partnerships do work. It does take the work though, right? You have to make sure the partnership makes sense. You have to make sure that your missions align enough to where you don't run into extreme mission driven when you start coming together to kind of put together these things. With chasing the funding, we do find that small nonprofits and small groups, you tend to look toward funding and create your identity around the funding available. And I think a real key point is finding a partner who's already in that space, right? And then using that kind of make the mission go forward, but not forgetting what you're looking to get done at the same time. I think it's really easy when we're all looking for funding and in need of funding, and there's so many things that we want to get done within our organizations and within our missions, but also just taking really care that we don't go too far to where we step out of what we can, our actual capacity, right? And the thing to get around that to get work done is the need for partners. It is the need for connecting, right? And taking on the thought processes of the groups around you, right? Like hearing you speak, I'm like, well, I didn't even mention, like Gavin and Davis Land is all put together. That's not New Haven in the sense that it's put together, right? And just bringing other partnerships and other groups' mindsets into the way you think about the work that you do will allow those partnerships to kind of show themselves. Sometimes it's not so hard to find them if you just really open your mind to what's really going on out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, actually, if I just could, just, you know, again, like, I agree, a really strong vote in, favor of forming these teams. I have seen how forming teams and developing networks actually works directly against competition. You know, certainly it was, the case, that, you know, decades ago, land trusts were competitive with each other in Northwest Connecticut, not so anymore at all. And I think it's like finding these commonalities of interest that allow people to kind of break down that, that distrust, that kind of nature of, you know, I want my piece of the pot. I do think that in many ways, the compartmentalization of funding that's available through our state programs does not do that any favors. You know, this idea that, you know, one organization is going to get one dedicated pot of money as opposed to another. If we were able to go in as partners for the same kind of a funding program using, you know, for the reasons that are connected to our aligned interests, then, you know, that would not, it would not have that same measure or tenor of competition by any means. The other thing I wanted to say is just like we need to be really creative in our thinking modalities about how to partner and who's on the team. Two really quick examples in Kent at the Kent Land Trust. We do protect a farm, as I said, we lease it to a farmer. She runs a business. And, you know, one time while we were trading stories about food insecurity and the rise of food insecurity across Northwest Connecticut, she said, I'd really like to be able to donate grade A produce to the food bank, but I can't afford to do that and still have a business. And recognizing that it was mission consistent for us to be preserving farmland, and that at a certain level, if we can't grow food in Northwest Connecticut, that we're all a little bit food insecure, we were able to come up with a program together where we basically underwrite the growing of crops directly for the food bank in Kent. And so, you know, kind of turning the tables on normal programming, taking something that might normally be a food bank program and making it a land trust program. Was an interesting way of dealing with that. Similarly, with the Greenprint, we have a regional conservation plan. It's called Follow the Forest, and it's a wildlife corridor that stretches across 4 states. This is looking at core forests and the linkages between them. By studying the linkages, we're recognizing that we're not really talking about conserving, you know, we can't really believe that we're going to conserve every single bit of this wildlife corridor. But studying where the linkages between core forests are allows us to then work with municipalities, with the Department of Transportation, to think about where we can make crossing safer, not just for wildlife, but for people, to think about how we can redesign culverts to you know, to deal with the new capacities of rain that we're experiencing, but also be beneficial for the passage of wildlife, including fish in our streams. So, you know, there are different ways of connecting within sectors that, you know, that do serve these aligned goals. And I would challenge us all to be creative in that, especially because I know that it's often the case that our, at least for land trusts, that we feel like we need to do it all, that we feel like we need to be involved in everything now, because all of a sudden everything is connected to the environment. There are many, many potential partners for us if we just open our doors to connecting.
Yeah, I would echo that that's a great way to include that portion, but to just say, think creatively, like if we're a community of land trust or municipalities, think really creatively about who else can diversify our partnership, bring something unique to the equation, whether it's access to another funding source, whether it's another usership, whatever it is that we can think creatively about what that could look like, and not just look for those model organizations that just replicate our mission. Because those might feel a little tricky, but, so can I shift the subject topic just a little bit, from one focus, take the focus off of our state agencies and onto your work, right? What are your communities doing? What are you doing specifically, in your community to have successful land use practice, or to prepare for successful land use planning, management? What does your community even need? And I'd love to hear, like, if you have examples of what you're working on. Or land use.
Oh, look, they're all looking at me. Yeah, so, how much time do we have? We're doing a lot in Thompson. As I mentioned, we rewrote pretty much every regulation that we have, to try to bring those things in line with the actual priorities that people state. And in brief, the priorities that we have teased out of the community through engagement activities is that they value their green space. They value their historical identity as an agricultural community, and that identity continues to the modern day, but they also value the history as an industrial corridor. Thompson's, although rife with challenges, as many places are, has perhaps not unique, but a pretty interesting combination in those two histories, because the bones of both are still in place, right? We have a whole industrial corridor, over time has grown up to be nearly residential, so that 95-ish% of our tax revenue is property taxes. This is obviously a problem, but has, for example, I believe it is the largest contiguous mill structure still standing in the state of Connecticut. It's 750,000 square feet, one building, more or less. We've been working with the developer to repurpose this 300-ish units of apartment housing plus 36,000 square feet of mixed-use space. That involved a brownfield grant from the ECD, which hopefully we'll finalize soon. And that's a $110 million project, right? That's going to be transformative from a housing perspective, from being able to bring in businesses. Of specific interest, I think, to the people here are two parallel projects. One which is funded by a pair of CTP grants in the Recreation Trails Grant Program. The airline trail in Connecticut starts in Thompson, travels down to Portland, and through the Recreation Trails Grant Program, we are redeveloping a portion of our leg as the historic interpretive park. And we justified that based on things we learned in COVID about how outdoor recreation was driving people to trails, and those trails drive economic development. Some work that was done before I got there by Connecticut RC&D kicked off the idea of developing the airline trail, and that gave me the platform to do that. So we're moving ahead with that. The thing that I'm currently working on, which I'm most stoked about and particularly interested in terms of its novelness and its innovation for the pretty under-resourced community, is we have a town-owned building at 65 Main Street. The history of the building is kind of interesting. It was deeded to the town in perpetuity by the same historic family that built the high school for the town. In the deed, it says you can't sell it, you can't knock it down. If it burns to the ground because it was struck by lightning, you have to build it back. It's been vacant for 12 years because the town has lacked the resources to do anything with it. So after some fairly epic battles, actually, involving some very frustrating conversations, but also some very understandable conversations in a community that is 95% funded by residential property taxes, that I was given the directive to go find free money, right? We don't care if you fixed it, but we're not gonna help you pay for it out of the town. So what started with a $2,500 investment by our Economic Development Commission to put a community garden on the grounds, I was able to leverage into successive grants so that now I have a pair of federal grants in the range of about $360,000, one for renovation of the structure and one for planning the repurposing of the structure as a small business support center with some focus on food system and agricultural startups to play into that idea of a history that people value. And it is adjacent to an inaccessible portion of our main municipal park, about 3.5 acres. As a part of the planning grant, we've retained a permaculture consultant to help us design a food forest on the property. So this will all unspool over the period of 1.5 to 2 years. I am 100% going to have to go out for more grant money for implementation, but this all started with a $2,500 match fund. Right, so it's exciting.
Yeah, I can see that. You know what I loved about your response was that you led with what the culture of the community is and what their values are. And that came back around to the project, not to the first side of the project is, and yeah, the community into it. So wonderful example of that.
I tell people all day long in every engagement meeting that I do on any project, I can generate ideas at an alarming rate, right? I'm like Alice in Wonderland, I'll believe 6 impossible things before breakfast.
Yes.
And sometimes I'll write a grant based on one. But in the end, if it doesn't meet the needs of the community that I'm serving, it's just gonna be vacant again.
Yeah, and I think what we find is that a lot of municipalities waste effort and time on not being connected to the community's needs and culture. So yeah, what else are y'all working on? What other projects are happening in the community that you're serving? Or what you want to see as far as land use in the communities that you're in?
So I serve a very different part of the state, the diametric opposite of Lower Fairfield County, where property values are stratospheric and land is very limited. So conservation is expensive. One of my members just bought an island for $85 million. And that was a live for that community, and it's not that large. So we have challenges. We are looking at some things. We have seen that the land, essentially everything is regarded as potential residential land, right? It's mostly zoned that way. And with the housing issues we're seeing, there's a lot of pressure to develop. If you go to Yukon Dairy Farm, you'll see these beautiful milk jugs from dairy farms across the state, most of which are gone. Ranch had dairy farms in the 20th century. Now we have none there. Not that I'm saying we should bring those back, but we believe there's potential to do high value agriculture in Southwest Connecticut. Yes, agriculture does have some environmental impacts, but it also protects the land from being converted to parking lot and buildings. And it provides a career ladder for people who don't really fit into the whole hedge fund financial services world. We need to have some diversity of career options. So we're doing a really groundbreaking study looking at, can we bring agriculture back to Southwestern Connecticut? There are some pluses. We have a huge, very diverse, very well-moneyed market in New York City. The other thing that I've been involved in is dealing with housing availability and affordability. And there is pressure to convert land for housing under the assumption that the supply of land is the limiting factor on housing stock, and we need to free up more land for housing. And that just does not seem to be true. Yes, housing does take up space, but the amount of space it can take up varies dramatically based on the density. Our estimates, and not only new housing, our estimates are that Connecticut has 1 million vacant bedrooms. We have a lot of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus bedroom homes in Southwestern Connecticut. 1 or 2 residents, that many of the homes are weekend homes. And we look across the state, over 100 municipalities, legally you're allowed to rent your home out when you're on vacation. most municipalities do not allow you to rent out a single bedroom. For some reason, that's scary. So we've been working at the state level and the local level to try to provide more housing options that have a minimal environmental impact. So whether it's renting out bedrooms, whether it's more housing, boarding houses, rooming houses, which don't have to be flop houses, whether it's accessory apartments and dwelling units, we can neatly integrate more housing into our suburban and rural communities. On the urban side, there's a lot of land that is frankly parking lots, underutilized, asphalt that's generating runoff that really doesn't need to be there. We have a lot of town centers where they have nice shops. Buildings are great, but they're 1 story tall. Most places we put on postcards are 2 or 3 or 4 stories tall. So there's tremendous opportunity to better utilize what we've already developed rather than developing greenfields. And that's been our focus.
Can I just build on that for 1 second, then I won't take up any more oxygen on this?
Jot it down, so I'm made a big time a little bit and want to make sure we hear from everybody else, but don't get thoughtful. You were gonna take that here,
Yeah. So I gave you a little bit of an overview of the different projects that we're working on, but one in specific that I'll talk about, Big Bingham, helped facilitate over in Salem. He purchased a 200-acre property and divided it so that this is like the prime example of the first question in the morning in the grass tops portion. 185 acres went to the Salem Land Trust for the open space preservation, and 15 acres went to Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust bought it as a farm. The big part of the exciting thing about it is right now we're working with a group of young Latina farmers and artists that it's a cooperative that are going to create, they're going to grow food and also create this they're calling it Seva, a tree, a certain tree, sort of symbolic references. So it will be remain a farm and be this creative space. And it's another interesting thing about it is that there are 5 POC women that are moving into this predominantly white community. And we were having a barn opening, a celebration, cider and, donuts, and someone, it's a small community, saw that the barn was open and pulled over and joins us. And it turned out that it was a neighbor and someone who helped be a caretaker for the previous farmer, the owner there. And she was overwhelmed to tears welcoming these young women into the community. So it was really heartwarming because they were nervous. They were nervous about moving into this community. When we met with the farmer and color group, one of the questions was how do you think they'll be? What are the concerns? How do you think they'll be welcomed into this community? And it just so happened, not to say that that's how everything's going to go in rosy, but at this opening that they were very much welcomed, and I'm so excited for the future prospects there. And David's still engaged in making connections with every single property that we have had a chance to be a part of has all been through connection. Nothing's been through the open market.
Yeah, that's a great partnership example, and I'm never proud of you all as observers, external to the project. I'm really proud of you all. Thank you. Yeah, what else is going on?
Just a quickie, really, when I looked at that first case example, the case scenario from this morning, and I was thinking about the antique farmhouse and, whether that would be restored for housing farm workers. I mean, my mind went directly to something that we've been doing in the town of Kent, which is to make our regulations more friendly and to open up possibilities for affordable housing by, kind of tweaking the accessory dwelling unit regs. And no, that didn't even come up this morning. So, like in my mind, I'm like, that house is not going to be a house for the farmers. They're not going to want that house. It's drafty or it's too big or it's, going to end up being repurposed and fund, the rest of the project because it's going to be cleaned up and sold to somebody at an upmarket price. But, this idea of ADUs as, something that comes in to be part of this project planning, to me, really reinforces that you just cannot cut out the grassroots and the people in the community, you absolutely have to involve them in the conversation so that there is that trickle up, so that somebody can say to, you know, the project planners, hey, you know, maybe there's another way to look at this. And so that was just a point that I was gonna make about something that's going on right now that is, you know, maybe not even within the ideal realm of people who are planning at a higher up level. The one other thing I wanted to say is just because it stuck in my brain this morning and it keeps reoccurring to me during this panel, is that there was a comment made at one point about how it seemed like all the land was spoken for. And that was a comment that was made in a way of like spoken for as in like, I have it, or I have it, and to me, it really should be about the land being spoken for. Like, we are all advocates of the land who are sitting on this panel. So like that dynamic just keeps recurring to me here in this panel today, is that we are speaking for the land. We are not speaking our ownership of the land. Great point.
So, for new plans and for ideas going into this year, and since I've stepped into the role, one of my big things is reconnecting or strengthening the connection back to the communities that we serve. Gathering the primary purpose, in my opinion, is the community around us. So, some changes that we're looking to initiate are within our community garden program, giving back some of that kind of power and ownership to the community gardeners who are there. Previously, we've always kind of gotten this pot of money and looked around and said, all right, you guys need 2 shovels and you need wheelbarrows and you need 10 yards of soil. And we've given the community gardens what they needed. And they were all things that were always needed, but it was from our perspective of what was needed. This year, we're looking to initiate a different place where we'll still do those things to an extent, but also saying, hey, because all 44 of our community gardens are run by that particular group within that community garden. We have insurance, we do the water, we build raised beds, we provide some plants, but I'm not saying you grow kale and you grow collard greens. So we're changing over to releasing some of those funds and going to them and saying, hey, this is a pot that you have for something at your community garden. And this is your pot that is separate from theirs. So that means that you're gonna have a small community event at your community garden and build your community around there, build that community garden around the event. And does that mean that you all need, I don't know, a small solar panel to run a compost or a new age composting kind of setup or anything like that? Just giving some of that ownership back to the people who are actually managing these community gardens. From our end, it's just really, it doesn't change our funding. It just changes how we recognize the opinions of the people in the community that we're working with. Along that same lines, really early in the conversation, we're looking to say, how can we do at least some of our farm space or some of our space, start building some type of incubator system around those spaces, where now we have learning from farm. We're not just farming our land, we're helping create the next generation of farmers out there, right? Because there's only so long I'm gonna be able to get out there and farm, or a lot of the farmers who are farming now are gonna be able to get out there and farm. And agriculture and farming and gardening is one of those essential, but becoming more and more lost kind of skill within our country and probably most of the world. So just how can we start giving back to the community with what we have, right? We've branched out a lot. I went through all our programs. So we definitely have the gambit of programs, but now it's figuring out how we reconnect these programs back to the new community, the new people within those communities that are here now, right? The things that was necessary and needed and wanted by the people in these spaces 15 years ago, 12 years ago when they are established. There's a new generation. If they think differently, and luckily, I think they think more openly, about a lot of things, right? There's much more willingness to connect between each other. So giving them the power to kind of do that within themselves is gonna be kind of the next step in kind of gathering data and really being able to serve the community in the way that the community needs to be served.
Yeah, what you got on one?
Well, there's a few things I can share, in relation to the committee and our mission and what we're working on for this coming year. And partnering with our city parks as using that space as a reservation to create a visual of what we believe our indigenous people did on the land. We realize that we produce what they say in our notes. The mission of our people coming together is like creating good medicine for the atmosphere, because it rekindles the connection of something that was lost from our society visually. And knowing how they were stewards of the land to be able to understand what's in our backyards and how it actually benefits us in a health perspective, but also connecting into people who actually deserve it more, which are people of homelessness. So our group has been tackling the homeless population of teaching them how to live better off the land, how to utilize the resources around them so that they won't be more hopeless to their conditions. And hopefully building a relationship between our medicine men and women in our indigenous community here in Connecticut to teach them how to be caretakers of the land that they are on, or being able to live better within the climates in which they are surrounding themselves with. I think one of the biggest things for us is to connect people to understanding that it's not just about us, it's more about everything else previous to us, the things that we've taken from our ancestors and pass it along into our future generations. But for the most part, we are hoping to teach a little bit more about how the people lived along the Connecticut rivers, how they actually use the water as an indigenous highway to transport a lot of the harvest that was planted here in Saginaw, which is Hartford, and transport it all up and down the East Coast, from as far as Maine all the way down to Delaware. This Hartford area has been a resource of many different acknowledgements that we don't tend to know because we don't do many land acknowledgements. So hopefully our group can try to broaden the horizon on how important land acknowledgements are, and learning of what is actually the resource to us to connect everything together. So this year, we're on our 5th annual Harvest Festival, which is known as the Saginaw Harvest Festival. We mostly hosted in Katy Park, which we learned that that was once the winter village of the Wampingur and Nipmuc tribe groups that lived in that area. And hopefully we can be able to broaden the horizon so that we would be able to rekindle that interest in those who don't know much about land or the people who lived on the land before.
Randy, I've attended to your harvest festival. I'm really excited to celebrate the fall. So in transitioning, I have some audience questions here. Some of them are spicy. So I don't want to claim those with perspective or thought. Thank you. The questions, but I definitely want to present them to you all to respond to. So starting with this smooth one, Jonathan kind of hinted at this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts across the panel. How are y'all building lines of succession or developing new community leaders in your work?
I didn't think that should be anyway for me because myself and my coworker, we haven't been there for even a year. So it went from non-volunteer run organization to staff members. So we're really developing it as we learn. That's what you mean. But and also being a community land trust, an important part for us is the development of chapters within the communities, and that's a part of like the stewardship of what, of being a soundboard of what the community needs are. And so there's leadership development within each of those communities within the chapters.
I can speak to you about. Amy will remember that for years I've been saying, who is gonna do this when we're not here anymore? We need to, facilitate getting, connected with people who are gonna be the workers in land trusts in the future. And we're at the Kent Land Trust, we're really committed to that. We're really committed to having a summer internship program that's, not really very rigid in terms of whether it should be a high school student or a college student or a master's or a grad student, but that what it should be is allow an opportunity for somebody who has an interest and wants to explore that during the summer, that they come and join us and do that for the summer. So it's almost more like for those of you who went to colleges that, or even thinking, I've ever experienced like a JH or something that's really open-ended, it's more like, don't come here and do work that we have set out to complete. Come here and explore your interest in getting engaged, and that might relate to community service. So, that I really believe in doing things like that with all of my heart, just encouraging people to take their connection to community service and blend it back with it. The other thing I would say is that succession planning is a really hot topic right now among land trusts, and things that we used to think were super dry, like strategic planning, are starting to become exciting if we approach them with the kind of rationale or vibe or vision that Jonathan was laying out, which is that, hey, let's take a look together at the state of where things are. Let's examine our history. Let's try and figure out where we're going and have a really great dynamic conversation about that, and invite new people to kind of opine, to like come into that conversation. And let's also figure out from a succession planning perspective who we think we want to have at the table, who's necessary to have at the table. And so something that I think used to be kind of rote and very consultancy is now something that is seeming more dynamic and more hopeful and much more exciting.
Yeah, succession planning, it's a bit different when you're in the public sector. I work for elected officials, and they will be replaced at some point or another. There will not be a vacancy. The challenge there is not the continuity of having somebody in office. It's making sure the programs don't falter when the political winds change. So it's a lot of conversations, even more listening to reassure the newly elected officials that they shouldn't disavow everything that their predecessors support. We've had a pretty good outcome in making sure we have that type of continuity, programmatic continuity, I'll say. The other challenge is staffing, and it is really, really hard to get people these days, especially in Connecticut, because Connecticut hasn't had a good reputation for a long time nationally. I joke when I travel to Colorado or any other outdoorsy state, I meet the Connecticut diaspora. All the people who left for nature. I think, oh my goodness, we have nature here right in Connecticut. Yeah, we are one of the very few states where within maybe 10-minute drive of any location in the state, there is a trail. Yes, we do not have the Rockies or the Alps. We do not have whitewater rafting, but you don't have to travel an hour or two like you do in Denver to go skiing. Everything is right here. And so I think the governor has been really strong and changing the attitude, the respecting of Connecticut, projecting a positive image. And I think if we're looking for people who are interested in conservation, the fact that they can have their house and have their trail too is a really strong selling point. And so I'm hopeful about the future that if we market Connecticut correctly, we can address these succession challenges.
I absolutely agree. My friends joke that I'm like tourism. come to Connecticut, you will love it. And also on my not too long ago trip to Costa Rica, and be surprised to be Connecticut before I was like, what are you all doing here? Like located for them. But for the next question, I actually am going to call out panelists that I want to hear your perspective on this particular thing. So Tara, I think this would be you. Mirna, I'd love to hear your input, but Caleb, I would love to hear if this is relevant to your community too. Do panelists have thoughts on alternative housing options such as tiny homes, smaller houses, etc., as a part of the solution for considering green space, providing worker housing, homelessness solutions, and affordable housing? And a lot of municipalities and solutions are prohibited by zoning regulations. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, of course, anybody can respond, but I'm thinking this about this.
Well, it doesn't matter to me. Good. Okay, sure. So that was part of what I wanted to tag on to what Francis was saying in terms of things like repurposing homes or other buildings for housing. If you are here and you are involved in the housing sector at all, either new construction, redevelopment, beg your developers to add studio apartments. I think that people don't think about this a lot, but think back to your own youth. What was the first apartment you lived in when you got out of college? Was it a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom? It may indeed have been an efficiency, a bath, a galley kitchen, and a single all-purpose room. Nobody is building it, right? Nobody's building it. And in a lot of the communities, particularly rural communities, there's no inventory of it. And people's kids are living in their basements until they're in their 30s. And that whole sort of process that we all had access to when we were younger is harder and harder to find. So that was one thing I wanted to nail on here. In terms of accessory dwelling units, when we did the rewrite, I was aware that the legislative changes sort of affirmatively encouraging it were coming down the pipe. So Thompson just wrote some very permissive ones. Essentially on any residential partial where the soils will permit it, in other words, where there's enough septic and well capacity, you can have up to 2 ADUs, and they just have to be subordinate in size to the primary dwelling. That's it. Anybody who tells you it needs to be more complicated than that is looking for reasons for it to be more complicated. Now, I will say this, not a single person has built one. I think that's partly because people don't really understand it, but also it's expensive to build things no matter how small they are. So while I think the push toward them is aspirational and appropriate, I think that we shouldn't be surprised that we haven't seen that much uptake for those reasons. So all those things. In terms of affordable housing, I am strongly suggesting or requesting every developer who comes to us to put at least a 10% set aside in Thompson. And I think this is probably not unusual for small, semi-rural or suburban communities. There's a lot of anti-renter bias. So I don't talk as publicly about those conversations that I'm having with the developers. I let those be in the background unless they come out. And then, you know, the state wants more affordable housing. Our community is not immune to it. This is the way we get there. Again, if you're working in that sphere, just do those things, right? And if you have zoning regulations left that are excluding any of those things, own up to it and fix it.
So we have a Southeastern Connecticut Community Land Trust as a lending source. We have a fund for land equity within Equity Trust. There are bridge loans that we use, you know, as we're turning over properties, and within that we have like they're like consultants to us as well for the financial liability piece. And the fabulous Rob is the one that who I connect with, and I was talking to him at the very beginning about You know, you hear out there, I said, Rob, you hear out there about the need for the larger homes, the 4-bedroom, you know, homes, family houses, and I said, tell me if this is true, when I'm also gleaning, you know, as a new person in this, I'm gleaning a need for the very small, you know, the single parent with the kid or a couple, or just like the very, very small places. Is that true, Rob? And he's actually up in Massachusetts and also not only works for Equity Trust, but is on the board for a land trust, a community land trust up there. And he said, you know what, that is what I see as well. So yes, I see the need for, and also just happen to love the idea of the tiny houses. I think they fit within this collaborative model that we're also talking about, the ability for this, if you think of a container home, kind of container kind of a space, like being able to plop it on a ledge type of thing, being less intrusive, not cutting down a whole area of trees, but where does it fit? How can we place it? I also think that, I mean, with the whole thing of other alternatives, I think it's important, not just the tiny, but, you know, do we need compostable toilets in a certain area? Like how do we make this work? And I also really strongly believe in affordable housing can be good design and should be good design. It really doesn't take much to make the windows proportional, placed correctly within, and make it aesthetically pleasing, you know. We get one architect to share with us some decent design and replicate some of that without it being in a house all people at one economic level in one place. So yes, I strongly believe in making that happen, although like you said, it has been a challenge to find those developers, but we've got our networks.
Yeah.
So-
Margaret, I just wanted to make some space, because you did mention homelessness earlier. Is there any comment that you'd like me to see, like whether or not your community would be favorable towards alternative types of lighting?
Yes, well, I will say that when we have had conversations about building primitive villages and our city parks to show identity of the people once existing, the problem came up as to the homeless people needing the space to live with them. And the question I had in mind was, is that a problem? And I said, it's already a situation where they're homeless and helpless. If there is someone to teach them how to not be helpless, they may understand their circumstances, understand how to actually build a new survival mechanism or skill, very different from what our survival skills are. And working with the hands of Hartford, it went from actually knowing 20 homeless people to actually knowing all of their names. And understanding how they got to that point. And some of them actually are not looking forward to going back to violent society. They want to live off the land. They actually want to live very remote, away from both of the people and create a world within the world, but they don't have a safer space to do it. And so our indigenous committee and community of people will actually work with the homeless people to actually show them how to find hope within their circumstances, because they were once judged the same way, savages, compared to the modern society of living in a house or having electricity. So living off the land is frowned upon by a lot of the people that came over versus the people who were originally from here. So we try to create a relationship between the two, because we realize that our homeless people are environmentalists. They recycle, they collect cans and bottles, and they've been doing it for quite some time. And they also are land keepers, because with them living within the climate of our parks and of our neighborhoods, we realize that they create a survival world within something that we could never imagine to. You know, we stress in the sense of a high electricity bill or not having enough food for the month, where they don't have that issue, where their issue may be more of keeping warm and knowing where to locate themselves throughout land, where the better locations to live in winter versus summer like the native tribes. At Hartford, the locates Farnsky Park. And what the Hartford for winter village, as far as summer village would be as close to the Keating Clock Tower about the Africa. And that's just to show the something that we may be very much unaware to why they did that. But if there's people to teach, I think there would be a better relationship to how to tackle things down. They don't want to end homelessness, so we're not going to even challenge that part. But what we will do is help them understand how to be better in their predicaments, and probably finding a little bit more of their own grounding to not be homeless. So hopefully working with the nonprofits like the Hands on Hartford, actually working directly with the person who's going through the circumstance, introducing them, helping them know their situation as kind of efficient help.
So I'm so glad you commented on that. The last question kind of hints at a little bit of what you're getting at. I think that we link conservation practices with wealth so often. Like, are you wealthy enough to conserve? Do you have enough, all of your needs met to care for the land? And what you're talking about, at least what I hear, is that there are people that don't have wealth, but have a conservation practice of caring for the land, depending on the land, and existing in concert with the land, and a more synergetic independence between land and people. So this question, the first part, I'm not gonna get to, because I think it opens up a really big conversation around the role of white privilege and wealth in conservation field. But I'm gonna try to instead focus on the second part, asking the panelists whether this compels you or not. Could only provide comment if it doesn't matter. Could you provide an example or a few comment on land conservation's practices that are tainted by prejudice, discrimination, or intolerance? I've heard it in a few comments already, subtly talked about, but it may be more directly. Do you have any comments about how the practice of conservation has perpetuated or supported prejudice, injustice on land use? But that's it. Did I just bring that recently? Is that weird?
Hey,
Okay.
I would say, without directly answering that point, but I would say one of the issues that comes up around the idea of conservation that I think is missed in kind of maybe solving that issue. It's like not even a direct answer, but maybe one of the solutions is for us to start thinking about conservation in conjunction with land stewardship, right? And then thinking about land stewardship, consider all the different models of land stewardship there are, right? As simple as the struggles that people who want to conserve land and have agriculture and farming going on at the same time, even within itself, that's a struggle. But if you think about conservation in the mind of open stewardship, there should be, that is a direct link, right? One really isn't done without the other. If you go back to the original stewards of the land, whether that be the indigenous people from America, the United States, or from people who have migrated to this country, right? Most of our culture started with people who conserved the land out of necessity, and in that conservation and stewardship, they grew food, right? They provided homes for people who didn't have space. They managed animals and their livestock, right? So conservation, I think, and I think a little bit of that first point, kind of pointing towards where conservation switched from to a practice of life to a practice of wealth, was it became a way to save land to not be used. And I think that's contradictory towards what conservation and land stewardship really looks like when you get to it in the most perfect sense.
I feel like that's so huge, and you were trying not to make it big, right? You're right. But I think the bias is if we're looking at the past practices of bias and why we are, as a society, racially divided the way that we are, and therefore our education system, which is like the biggest thing that could make my blood boil, because we're not allowing young people to even begin their lives with an even start. That what do we do to provide support to shift that, as in community land trusts, which are a different narrative to how we see land. Instead of purely for economic benefit, it's a bit of a combination of both. Like, yes, there's the ability to build equity, and there is the responsibility for stewardship and the rest of your community. What was the question? Oh, and so a couple of things there, like one earlier during the Grass Tops panel, someone said something about being near transportation hubs, and that actually makes me a little bit like, it makes me cringe a little bit, because yes, I do acknowledge that if you're lower income, you don't have a vehicle, you're gonna wanna be near a transportation hub. But it's also perpetuating history by saying that therefore we belong in the city areas, and what are our school systems like in the city, and what are the tightness of resources in the city. And so therefore, should we not be integrating and saying that perhaps Mateo Martinez, good, yeah, to be homeschooled, but as an example, the name, that he should maybe be going to have the same opportunity to go to Oberline or wherever else in our communities does exist, like creating that inequity and the ability for equity. And to like give the prime example, think about the large crimes, the large white collar crimes that are done and not, that there aren't real repercussions for. And then think about, I wish I knew the particulars right now, but it was on our coastline, the woman who sent her kid to another community for school because of the school system, and she was incarcerated. All she wanted was her kid to have a better school system. She was incarcerated. So it can give opportunities for other people to live in communities where historically they did not have the opportunity. That is a bit of a correction of, not a correction, but it's an opportunity now for previous biases to perhaps have a little bit of a shift in a different direction.
Yeah, I remember that instance, and it was tough to hear.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying is there are certain people, certain places you can't have access to. And yeah, our state needs to reconcile with our differences. And I heard that in the comments, right? Some of our history that is not so beautiful here in the state, culture that is not so beautiful, that we need to actually question why we're doing conservation work we're doing. Is it rooted in unhealthy or racist and harsh practices? I'm going to stop because I'm already over time. But one of my favorite things.
It started with the juicy.
I know, I should have read it. So, but one of my favorite things is when we have a panel or discussion that there feels like there's more to be said. Because I don't like the idea that we've exhausted everything in this moment, because that's unrealistic. Please take these concepts and keep them going beyond this panel. Should interact with this panel because they are rock stars. And also brainstorm, be creative, keep talking, right? So I know this might feel rough and uncomfortable that I'm going to literally just stop at such a big topic, but I hope that you all embed it into the rest of your day, your week, even 2024, if you haven't set your goals yet. Go ahead, put this in here. So thank you all for sticking with us through this session. Please give my panel a round of applause.